Boldwood presents Welcome to the Cornish Country Hospital, written by Jo Bartlett and read by Emma Powell. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. If Danni could have stopped it from happening, she would have. If she'd had any say at all, she would rather have hated her best friend's fiancé on sight than spent the last 7 years falling more and more in love with him. But life didn't play fair like that, and, by the end of the year, the only man she'd ever loved would be walking down the aisle with the woman Danni thought of as her sister. This was supposed to be a fresh start. Danni muttered the words as she headed up the coastal path on the cliffs above Port Cara. Brenda didn't answer, but then basset hounds weren't exactly famed for their ability to give relationship advice. The only thing Brenda was famous for was leaving trails of slobber that no cleaning agent in existence could remove. I've taken a job I didn't even want and spent every penny I had buying a house on the opposite side of the country. And what do? Danni kicked a patch of loose gravel on the path ahead of her. They both take jobs at St Piran's hospital and buy a house half a mile away. Half a bloody mile! Brenda looked up, the sudden movement sending some of her trademark slobber through the air as her jowls swung from side to side. She'd heard all this from Danni 100 times before, but she still gave her owner the same look of sympathy she'd given her every other time, those soulful eyes seeming like they wanted to say so much. It was just as well Brenda couldn't speak. She'd probably have told Danni to pull herself together and get a grip. God knows, Danni had looked in the mirror and told herself that often enough. She didn't want to be this person, someone who'd wasted 2,500 days praying for a miracle that involved Esther falling for someone who made her far happier than Lucas ever had. That revelation would be followed by a short interval, the bare minimum that decency dictated, before Lucas finally realised it had been Danni he loved all along. Then they'd all get on with the rest of their brilliant lives, their old friendships completely intact and with none of the complications that having an ex hanging around so often brought. It was like Danni was trapped in a rom-com, except somehow she'd ended up as a supporting character in her own life story. Taking the job in A&E at St Piran's hospital had felt like a huge step backwards in her career. The 7 years she'd spent secretly loving Lucas had been the same 7 years the two of them had spent undertaking specialist training at a teaching hospital in London. When they'd both been Lucas as an associate specialist trauma surgeon and Danni as a consultant in A&E, it had felt like a dream come true. They'd be working in parallel some of the time, with part of Lucas's role involving assessing trauma patients in A&E. Danni had tried not to admit, even to herself, how relieved she'd been that they wouldn't be working in different hospitals, and going out for a drink to celebrate the news had seemed the most natural thing in the world. It was the second bottle of champagne that had changed everything. She'd suddenly looked across at Lucas and realised that if she didn't tell him now, she never would. Halfway through that second bottle of champagne, she'd opened her mouth to say the words, but nothing came out. She sat there, not moving, with every fibre of her being screaming at her to just say it, to tell him she loved him before she lost him for good. But even in a haze of veuve Clicquot, she couldn't do it to Esther. Not to the woman who'd sent a congratulations bouquet to Danni that was so big she could hardly see over it, or who'd taken her call just days before when there'd been a young patient Danni's team couldn't save and she'd woken herself up sobbing at 3 a.m. Esther had let Danni cry on her shoulder so many times in the 10 years they'd known one another, and it was Esther who got Danni through when the training had felt like it was going to overwhelm her, or when her day had seemed tougher than she was. Esther was the person Danni confided all her fears to, and all her secrets. All except one. Loving Lucas was something she hadn't admitted to a soul, and in that moment, staring across the table at him in the corner of a noisy pub, she'd realised that she never would, because as much as she loved him, she loved Esther more. It was why she had to get away, because if she stayed, she'd never be able to get over him. Any doubt she might have had disappeared when Esther had texted her later that night. "Oh my God, he's finally asked me. Not like I'd imagined, but I don't care. Apparently, it was drinks with you that got him thinking, and the ring was something he made in the taxi on his way home. At the wire from one of the bottles of champagne you two so rudely drank without me." Smiley face. "He's promised there will be an upgrade, but I don't care about that either. Let me know when you can do lunch, and I'll fill you in on all the rest. I promise not to be a bridezilla, and you can wear whatever dress you want. Love you. Kiss, kiss." Danni had wanted to get in her car and leave the moment she'd read the text, to just keep going until she could outrun her feelings. Instead, she sat there staring into the darkness of her empty flat. It was like being torn in two, wanting to feel happy for but finding it impossible when her heart felt like it had been ripped out of her chest. When she told Esther she was turning down the job in London to go back to the same stretch of Cornish coast where she'd grown up, it had been her best friend's turn to be heartbroken. She couldn't understand what on earth would make her want to leave, or to reject a job in one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country to go and work in a tiny Cornish hospital, an 8-hour drive away from the people who loved her most. Especially as Esther knew it didn't feel like home to Danni, not anymore. Danni had been 10 years old when she decided to become a doctor. The same age she'd been when her father, Trevor, had died from a massive heart attack at work. There'd been no one around to save him, and Danni had vowed, then and there, that she'd learn how to bring someone back from the brink of death, to stop other families going through what hers had been forced to endure. Her mother, Nicola, had never been the same after that. She'd coped by trying to find solutions to her problems at the bottom of a bottle of gin, and by sending Danni and her brother to boarding school so she didn't have to try to be there for them. School had been Danni's solace, and losing herself in books had been a refuge from the real world. It didn't matter if it was the textbooks she clung to during the day or the novels she read under the covers at night. Those books, as well as the snatched days she got to spend with her brother Jo, when their mother reluctantly had them back for the holidays, had been the only things that had felt like home since losing her father. Until she met Esther. Esther had been just 2 weeks into her first full-time nursing job the day that Danni had started a 2-year foundation program at the same hospital, straight after finishing medical school. They clicked straight away, and within 3 months they'd been sharing a flat. By that time, Jo had settled in Australia, where he'd gone for his post-university gap year. Her mother was living on a houseboat in Bristol with her boyfriend, Paul, who she'd met on an art therapy course 8 years after her husband's death. These days, Danni's mother seemed content to scratch a living as a part-time artist, selling the paintings she and Paul did from the back of their boat. Danni was glad her mother had found some level of happiness, but Nicola still couldn't cope with anyone's problems but her own, so their relationship consisted of superficial conversations and meet-ups over lunch every couple of months or so. Meeting Esther really had felt like coming home for the first time in years, and through her, she'd found a whole new family too. Esther's parents and paternal grandparents had treated Danni as if she really was one of the family. Esther's mother, Caroline, often told Danni she thought of her as another daughter, and even if she didn't love her best friend as much as she did, she'd rather have died than hurt any of them. Which was why she had to leave, and why she could never reveal the real reason for going. "Please stay. Nothing here's going to be the same without you. I know I've moved in with Lucas now, but he's just a boy. I still need my girl around too." Esther had taken hold of both her hands. "I can't for the life of me understand why you want to leave London and go down there. I know it's beautiful, but there's so much more scope for your career here. And more importantly, you've got all of us." Everything Esther had said had made perfect sense, but she had no idea that seeing Lucas almost every day felt as if it was slowly killing Danni. She tried to tell herself at first that her feelings for him would pass and that the initial spark of attraction would die out. Then she got to know him, and any hope she'd had that her